due to the way that, again, all this armor plating kind of circumcised. Wait, what am I saying? It's officially time that I start to kind of roll in how easy it is for me to just kind of go to the store and grab a Batman McFarlane and be like, oh, that looks kind of neat, and then bring him home, because it's time that I start showing some restraint and kind of be a little bit more selective as to which ones I bring to the channel. Because Endless Winter Batman here is a testament to that. Now, McFarlane decided to make a figure, not only just a figure, but rather a whole entire wave of Build-A-Figure units for the Endless Winter Justice League series. That's pretty much a crossover event in which Frost King is pretty much doing his usual shtick of trying to take over things, and of course the Justice League is calling upon themselves to stop them. And so it's also another excuse for Batman to bring forward his winter coat and be like, you know what, I'm ready for everything. I'm ready for every contingency plan, including bringing out a pimp coat out. And that's pretty much what we end up here in this version of Batman. It's pretty much winterized Batman, while at the same time keeping all the usual Batman aesthetics. Now, props to this being another Batman figure that's a bit sensical when it comes to the open mouth thing, only this time it's not so much bullets that he has to worry about, rather than just the ice cold temperatures of the environment, and as such it would totally blatantly makes sense, especially me as Batman. I would be like, hell no, I'm not exposing my mouth to frostbite that way, and therefore covering up the mouth. So I really do like this cowl. I do like the goggles, though I was kind of, I don't know why, but I just thought that they were removable for some reason, especially since pressing up against them, I can kind of feel like they're nudging a tiny bit, but unfortunately, the goggles are not removable. Other than that, it's just your traditional Batman cowl that is molded fairly well. And as we proceed on with the figure, one thing that stands out to me very well here is that they did an exceptional job at molding out this figure. And frankly, I use the term figure very loosely, unfortunately, with this guy. You can kind of already tell where I'm going with this here, because the detail behind his suit, specifically this winterized suit with the coat, as well as the armor plating underneath, is actually rather exceptional. It's one of the finer detailed figures that I've seen from McFarlane and for Batman that I've seen in quite some time. The texturing, as well as the puffiness of the rims here of the coat itself, as well as the shoulder pads, the very flexible shoulder pads, are all molded and sculpted out beautifully. I love the texturing of the coat, despite the fact that mine came with some form of a perforation here on the side, on his right side towards the bottom. But outside of that, the actual molding and the creases forming around the belt that's kind of conjoining everything together, which of course makes up of his traditional utility belt, is really, really well done and really well painted. When you get to the more tactical and militarized portions of his suit, specifically where you can kind of make out of the torso here with what is practically one of my favorite bat symbols I've seen on a McFarlane Batman figure in quite some time, you see it come out very well that the sculpting is immaculate. And then you get down to the, again, the Kevlar kind of look to his pants, the armor plating on his shins and his knee pads and the guards around them, as well as his boots. It's very tactical, very kind of angular, but it works in this sense because it's supposed to be a snow tundra enduring suit, and as such, you expect it to be padded. You expect it to withhold those kind of temperatures in the environment, so it totally makes sense. And as we kind of navigate around the arm area, like I said, the shoulder pads here on the top portions of his shoulders that are placed effectively well. They're not only very flexible, but they're also placed on the top portion of his shoulders, so that allows wiggle room for this part of the arm to kind of move about, is a really cool and interesting design. As we move down to the gauntlets here, it all looks very well, and I love the color palette utilized here that is very wintry. It's very cold, so to speak, but it works for Batman. But, and you knew there was going to be a but, despite the really cool, no pun intended, and very holistic look of Batman here with the coat, it's very seminal to Batman. Like, this is definitely what Batman will look like if he was to come up with a winterized suit. But frankly, and this is most definitely a pun, his articulation becomes frozen because of it. Yes, boo me all you want, but frankly, this is where this figure ultimately suffers and makes me think, yeah, I didn't really buy a figure. I bought a statue. I bought a statue that's part of a Build-A-Figure line. And many of you might be wondering, especially, you know, as avid McFarlane toy collectors are probably going, First time? Because I know I've seen people kind of tell me before about the weaknesses in articulation, especially for some of the more recent McFarlane figures. Because, yeah, I remember where they were very flexible and unique and distinct. And now it looks like maybe we're just running a little too much before we can learn to walk, as far as McFarlane cranking out these Batman one after another. And sadly, Endless Winter Batman is becoming a distinct sign of that happening here, where we have style being favored over substance. And because of that, it's all coming down to this coat right here, to the very controlled winter look that, like I said, quite literally, not even just meant to be a pun, freezes the articulation. The only area safe from this distinction is the head joint here, which can still rotate 360 degrees, even though the collar of the coat can kind of guide it in a very diagonal way when you start to peer it over to his shoulder here, and can slightly pivot upwards and downwards. It's not the most flexible joint that I've had, but it does the job, as well as being able to slightly tilt. Not much in the way of tilting. I would probably say that's the only area that they kind of pulled back on. And like I mentioned before, compliments to these shoulder pads here, because of the way that they're made out of this flexible rubber. They're also not placed on the entirety of the shoulder like I've had in some of the more recent McFarlanes that I was kind of criticizing, because this time they only placed the adhesive on the top part, and because of that and the flexibility of the rubber, you're able to rotate the arm 360 degrees. You're gonna have to finesse it a little bit, but it can be done. Now, upon moving it about, I then came to the realization that despite having the same texturing and attention to detail as far as design and looks with the coat in hand with the arm and made out of that same material, it also reminded me an awful lot of the flimsiness of the Zurinar Batman, where I showed off those arms feeling kind of cheap. Unfortunately, the arms on Endless Winter Batman here are practically being cut from the same cloth, or rather the same plastic, because you can kind of see off right here in the shoulder area, there's something about the way this shoulder is designed versus the proportions of the rest of the arm that just do not fit. I noticed it right out of taking them out of the package, and I'm like, something is off here. It feels like these pieces were made bigger in mind as opposed to the shoulder ball joint. Now, even though it's able to rotate 360 degrees, it is still able to extend off to the sides, and once again, that shoulder piece allows that to be because of its flexibility. Mine had a much stiffer right shoulder, but it can still get the job done. Once we get to the bicep swivel, it can definitely rotate 360 degrees in place. However, that's where you most noticeably see how weird and off kilter that cut is right there with the plastic. It just looks off. Look at that. I don't know. There's just something kind of standing out in that area right there. I don't know if it was meant to blend in with the shoulder piece a little bit more accurately, but you can see right there, it's kind of giving him that hunched over look that I even criticized Gotham Knight's Nightwing to also hold in his arms as well. Now, you do get two joints at the elbow that do have decent cuts, as it kind of bends all the way upwards like so it's able to flex all the way through, except of course that elbow joint is going to look a little disproportionate as you kind of cut across the plastic here. And then the wrists are also a little bit on the restricted side because of the way that this whole overall gauntlet piece is designed. You can rotate it 360 degrees, but once you get to any of the vertical movement with that cut inside, I can tell from my distance, from my observation here, that it is cut the same way, but it doesn't move the same way. And again, I could attribute that to the way it's just overall designed, but I can barely nudge any of the wrists up or down. But that's the least of these figures' problems when it comes to articulation. Then we get to the torso. It's practically non-existent, as you can blatantly tell due to the way that this stylistic coat is designed. And this is where a very good opportunity to finally give us some removable kind of suit asset or piece of his armor, part of his suit, being able to be removable and transformative, something that McFarlane has never done before, and kind of keep things fresh and new with their figure line. And would have made Endless Winter Batman an unlikely figure to add to the collection. Would have been to at least incorporate some kind of functionality within the utility belt to either press it or pull it apart or something to detach, and have the coat be removable to take full advantage of the joints that I can blatantly see are still in there, that are still per the McFarlane 22 points of articulation praise that they often give themselves on the packaging. They always say 22 points of articulation. I can see them in there, but because of the way that this coat is quite literally hot dogging the figure itself, it almost doesn't move. The best that I can do is kind of wedge my fingers in here, phrasing, and kind of twist the torso left to right, and you can hear slightly the plastic kind of squeezing in and of itself and a little bit of churning. And if I zoom in rather close, you can kind of see the torso moving left to right upon that mid-torso cut that McFarlane figures traditionally have. But because of the way that this whole overall ensemble is designed, that's barely it. That's barely all the movement that you're really going to get out of this mid-torso area, so don't be looking for any otherwise you risk damaging the figure. And once you get to the legs, it's kind of the same ordeal, except for one particular axis that it moves upon that I was fully not expecting, but it also kind of makes sense once you hold the figure in hand. When it comes to those top leg joints, extending towards the front and moving the legs upwards is very strenuous, once again, due to the way that this coat is. Now, it's much more generous than it is on the torso joints. I can tell you that because of the way that the coat is able to move off to the side like that. But that's as far as you get, really, with the top leg joints moving upwards like so. And you could practically forget about anything towards the back. It pretty much follows suit to the rest of the McFarlane figures because of the way that that crotch piece is designed and becomes part of this whole armor plating that he's got going on right here in the middle, which again, like I said, looks cool, but functionality is out the window. Now, when it comes to extension is where it surprises me in the most unlikeliest of ways, thanks to the way that the coat is cut here in the middle. Now, do be careful because you risk making the cut further higher due to the extension and the pulling and the separation going on right here. But thanks to this cut here in the middle via his coat, extension is actually rather generous. It's not the most extensive leg joints that I've seen in McFarlane's from before, but it's at least much better than I can give it credit for, thanks to, again, the way that this coat is designed and splits apart there in the middle. This is frankly as far as it goes, however. The two joints at the knees do allow very rigid movement due to the way that these knee pieces and armor pieces are designed, and it's ratcheted, so it stays in placement rather well, except this is pretty much as far as it goes because not only, again, is the coat kind of in the way, but there is some reprieve due to the cut here in the middle that allows the knees to bend. It's only once you look a little closely that you'll notice that because of the way that they like to design Batman with all this armor and all this plating and Kevlar looking kind of material, that the legs end up becoming a bit too thick for its own bridges. And because of that, the knees pretty much stop right about right there. You can kind of see the pieces kind of interfering with one another. And due to that, it's not fully able to bend all the way upwards like some other McFarlanes are able to do. And then when we get to the ankles is where things get just a little testier because, yes, we do have a ball joint in there. We actually have a very specific joint that looks like it can maybe move on two parts. One towards the bottom where the foot actually becomes its own piece, and then one towards the top that's kind of closer to the middle shin area. I don't know how to properly describe it, but upon fidgeting with the foot, I can kind of see the two joints moving on different parts, like at the top and at the bottom. And you could argue that a lot of other ball joints from McFarlane's have done this before. It's just that this is the one that I felt was probably because of the way that all this is kind of constricted and rigid that I noticed was giving me just a bit more slack. But the functionality still stays the same and practically becomes a bit more restrictive due to the way that, again, all this armor plating kind of circumvents. That's the word I was looking for. Jesus Christ. Circumvents this entire area of the boot. And functionality most of the way stays the same, except like you can hear right there, it's kind of fighting with me as I move the ankle horizontally or try to pivot it downwards or upwards, which is very ratcheted. It's probably the most ratcheted set of ankles that I've dealt with in a McFarlane thus far, and it's due to the way that it's all kind of designed. Thankfully, the toesies are still found there and are able to not only bend upwards, but I think the one on my right is ratcheted. It's probably the first time that I've ever seen that on a McFarlane. But at this point, you can kind of get the gist of where I'm going with this figure. It's practically a statue, and again, it makes for some very funny puns in relation to its frozen background, But for a Batman figure, especially one that I thought looked pretty cool, it's sad to see that only half of my expectations were truly met. And that doesn't even kind of even takes into consideration the accessories, which I understand need to take a little bit of a fallback here due to the fact that this is part of a Build-A-Figure line. Traditionally, when you have Batman figures or even any kind of McFarlanes in general that are part of a Build-A-Figure wave, they sometimes cut back a little bit on the accessory budgeting because they have to still throw in those other parts to make that fifth figure that's part of that wave. And Batman is no exception here because this time they only threw in a simple but very garish Batarang here. In fact, this is probably the thickest, most bombastic looking Batarang that I've ever seen. Now, granted, you could also argue that this is a multifunctional Batarang that probably has some kind of sonar or remote control kind of detonation found within it due to this central portion here colored in a crimson red. And overall, it doesn't look too bad, except this is just, kind of over the top. I don't know. I just never seen a Batarang of this nature before. But I guess you could say with his, very in-your-face kind of design for his pimpin' winter coat here, I guess it kind of makes sense. But you know what doesn't make sense? Me having bought this figure. Because unfortunately, they decided to go with style over substance as far as the articulation and the posability, because there's just so many windows of opportunity, such as the unbuckable utility belts that could have at least served as a way to give it lesser restrictions on set articulation, especially around the torso area. Maybe at least one additional accessory, maybe the removable goggles, just to kind of give, like I said, a little bit of flavor, a little bit of a distinct nature to this figure, instead of just saying, well, we got to make a Build-A-Figure wave out of the Endless Winter storyline. Well, we got to throw in Batman, we got to throw in Superman, all these other different Green Lantern, all these characters that make up the wave, so that then you can have your Frost King Build-A-Figure assets built later on and packaged in. Personally, I thought that the actual look of Batman in this particular case looked awesome. Unfortunately, it did not pay off. And if you couldn't already guess, there's no real incentive here for me personally to buy the rest of the waves just so I can design the Frost King, especially when taking into consideration that this is a Batman-centric channel or a Batman Spider-Man-centric channel. Not really going to cover those other characters. But if you warmed up to Endless Winter Batman and still feel compelled to add them to your collection, I'm going to have affiliate links in the description that you can use to then add them to your McFarlane set and also help out the channel in the process. In the meantime, check out this other McFarlane toy review showing up on your screen right now. And as always, guys, stay humble. See you later.